Hello, it's Jack Tutor from Attention Magazine. Welcome to Crucial Listening, the podcast where I speak with musicians and sound artists about 3 albums that are important to them. My guest this time is Laura Luna Castillo, who was situated in Puebla, Mexico when we spoke for the podcast, but as I'm recording this now, is now based in Seattle. We spoke shortly after the release of her record Tuberose on Whited Sepulchre, which is an incredible record, one of my favourites of the whole year, and in fact I only loved it more for speaking to Laura about it. It has this really fragmentary nature to it, this sense of different speeds of passing time, different spaces, different interiors. She talks during this podcast about the connection between the record and the illusion of the perfect memory. I think that was so enlightening to hear about. And we had a really nice conversation about her 3 important records as well. Laura sent me this wonderful document of notes that she'd made prior to the podcast, which was beautifully written and gave me so much insight before we talked. This conversation was wonderful. Again, we seemed to touch quite a lot on memory, the subjectivity of retrospect, and subjective experience. I just loved hearing her talk. It was such a great conversation. So you can check out more of Laura's music over on Bandcamp. I mean, there's certainly one for Tuberose at Laura Luna Castillo, wsr.bandcamp.com. I should also shed light on a recent compilation she was involved in called Remembrance Species 2020, which features 46 pieces and was curated by Bell Lungs of Remembrance Species Scotland and Laura as well. And all proceeds from the album are split between an axolotl conservation charity in Mexico City and also a seabird conservation charity in Scotland. So it's a really wholesome, awesome project. Lots of great names involved in that compilation too, so do check that out. I'll include a link in the show notes, along with other links to Laura's music and her picks as well over at attentionmagazine.co.uk/crucial listening or on your podcast app. Cool. Hope you enjoy this one, the last Crucial Listening of 2020. Thank you very much for listening this year. Please do rate and review. I hear that helps. And please enjoy this conversation with Laura Luna Castillo on Crucial Listening. Hello, Laura. Welcome to Crucial Listening.
Hi, Jack. Thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you very much for coming on the podcast. Now, you have chosen 3 important records for us to talk about. As we were discussing beforehand, you have given me a wealth of information to dive into, which I've had a fantastic time with. We also need to talk about your album Tuberose, which I've been really enjoying as well, which was released recently on Whited Sepulchre. And first question for you is, how long did it take to put this release together? When did you start working on it and how long did it take?
Well, I usually start working like a year before. So I started in 2019.
Wow.
And it's very organic. My process with these tracks was, some of these tracks were born from audiovisual projects or performances that I was working on. And from having that visual side, the sound just got constructed almost on its own. And other of the tracks, I was finishing them right at the beginning of the pandemic, around March, May, June.
Yeah.
And so it is a strange mix of mental states, I think. just finishing all the tracks, starting in one reality, and then just wrapping up the album, with all the stuff going around. So yeah, I guess it took me like half a year probably just from start to finish, and probably much more before that, just getting like the concepts or the ideas behind the sounds I wanted to achieve.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned in particular 3 books, I think, fed into Tuberose. So could you tell me a little bit about those and how they give you the sort of conceptual underpinning of the music?
Yeah, well, there is... I always get so inspired by books. Like, I'm really visual when I'm reading. So every time I read something, I'm always, creating these images. And so I think it is a very strange mix that I had with these books. The first one was The Art of Perfumery, the extracting odors. And it's basically like a cookbook, like a recipe book for extracting odors and pressing plants. And it's very technical, but at the same time, because of the time it was written, it is just very poetic the way it's written. So when I was just reading it, I was just having these images, of just trying to preserve something like a purity of an essence. But in order to preserve that, there is all this journey, of adding all these other things. So in the end, that essence is just basically an illusion, or a trick that is achieved by using all these other smells and chemicals. And so I found it really, like, the parallels for me was very obvious in terms of how the memory works. And that kind of lines the way for the next book that really inspired me, which is called Proust Was a Neuroscientist, by Jonah Lehrer.
Yeah.
I really don't know how to pronounce his last name.
That sounded good to me.
So I think these 2 books tie so well together because in this book, Proust Was a Neuroscientist, they're talking about all these authors or, people who were working with senses like smell or taste. They had somehow... they were ahead of their times in terms of what neuroscientists were about to discover in terms of how memory works. And so there is a very nice passage where they are talking about a chef who is obsessed with getting the essence of a dish, and it's all olfactory. And they're saying, in order for this chef to get that smell, that essence of that amazing dish he spent hours preparing, he had to add all these other ingredients that just to make that perfect smell of like a steak. And they've added like vanilla and things that wouldn't go into steak, but it's just to increase that memory, that image. And so I find it really interesting, just that play between memory and imagination and aspirations, associations. And I think that's those 2 parallels between those books. I found them very poetic at the same time and very evocative. And in the end, I was really thinking of Tuberose as an argument against the search of the perfect memory. It's like that acceptance of there is no such a thing as a perfect essence or as a perfect remembrance of a moment or an experience.
Yeah. Feels like a really interesting time to be fixating on the nature of memory. I don't think I'm alone in experiencing the last 12 months as a complete and utter time warp where, anything prior to March could easily be 2-3 years ago, if I didn't know any better. And to hear that you were composing a work that straddles that boundary is really fascinating. I'm curious to know, what was it like considering memory and these kind of topics whilst putting together a work that sort of dealt with that time period and composing before and after that divide and sort of revisiting ideas that you were generating, prior to the pandemic taking place? Like, did that evoke much for you?
Yeah, I think it's been a very interesting process because since the time I finished the tracks, and there's always this time where you have to wait until other albums are released, or there's always this time, it's never fresh out of the oven. So I've really had time to sit down with these tracks, and it has been very surreal because I think they've also evolved. The ideas I went into by making them, the original ideas I had, they really worked, like you mentioned. Now that I hear them again in this context that we are all in, and I think there's always something very introspective with just the fact of being at home. There's always these talks about idle introversion, or this constructive boredom that you only get to do at home. And I think because of the rush of the how our lives were back before all of this happened, I think that was it still is to a certain extent, but that was more a privilege, that you could actually just stay at home and just kind of reflect on things, past and memories. And so I think what's been really interesting for me is that it's become a more widespread experience. I think more like a global experience, that we're having these vivid dreams, like a lot of people comment on that. And for example, some people are rediscovering objects, memories, old iPods that have these time capsules, just because you are at home and you are well, let's clear the clutter, or so you are a lot of people are having these experiences of discovering little time capsules or time machines, that just somehow got lost in the clutter of the house. And I think that's also one of the main essences of the album that have always inspired me, those little residual memories that just get lost. They get lost in a pocket of time or somewhere in the house, and then when you find them again, they just resurface. And it's really inspired by, for example, Proust with Eating the Madeleine, and how you can just have those little glimpses of memories. So I think this album has also gained new significance for me as well. As I've been listening to it, progressing through these strange times as well. I think it's this idea of, the elusiveness and malleability of memories. And I think the more time we have of being introspective, of kind of letting us go within those memories, I think the more we start discovering strange associations, almost like a synesthesia that we didn't know we had. And I find that really interesting, and I do find that a little bit with this album with Tuberose. And also I've had that experience with, for example, the 3 albums that I've chose for today. So it's just been very, very strange to think about these experiences and the impact it's having on our memories.
There's one more question I wanted to ask about Tuberose, because I mentioned it in my review as well, and it still juts out as I listen now. The second half of the track, This Process is Conducted Cold, feels from my end as a listener like something quite anomalous. Something feels very singular about it compared to the other sections of the record, which have this very fragmentary nature. It feels like a real anomalous moment of clarity. I'm just intrigued to know how you perceive that moment of the record and whether or not it juts out as particularly different from the rest of the record for you as well, or that's just how I'm receiving it?
I was really, really happy to read your thoughts on that track, because I hadn't thought about it like that, like in those words, which is, I mean, it's always really interesting. My idea when I was, or the mental image that I had, it was, thinking about these processes of, extracting odors, or I was thinking of, when a material or an object or a molecule reaches this perfect temperature where time seems to stop, and it just seems like you can grab the molecule or a moment, no, because it's so frozen that you can see everything, no, that is like this clarity. Yeah, I hadn't thought about it. I was thinking more like this perfect moment where everything is stopped, and suddenly you have a few glimpses where you can see everything at once, because of it has reached a perfect temperature that is obviously not gonna last. It's just so I was just thinking of this process, not almost like an alchemist process of just reaching that kind of like golden moment towards a process in our memories, no, like this kind of clarity, but thinking it as if it was this chemical process. But it was really, really interesting to read what you were saying, because it is, in other words, it is the same as I was picturing, in my mind, this moment of, this kind of anomaly that is really sought after, but very rare, no, like just this kind of like a piercing moment that suddenly manages to break through. So it was really interesting. Thank you.
No, not at all. And I'm so glad to see other people seem to be resonating strongly with this album. I've seen some really positive feedback. It's an amazing record. I really implore people to check it out. We should talk about your important records, Laura. Now, the first question that I like to put to my guests is around how you thought about the term important when you came to your selection. So sounds like there was a specific way you understood that term, or a place you took it in order to come up with this list. So I'd love to hear about that. Yeah, well, I chose them because I think I'm in a very specific state of mind recently. But I also chose them because they are really albums that I just don't get tired of. That no matter what year or in what stage of my life I am, I just keep coming back to them, and they still resonate in some way or another. Almost like books, no? When you read one book when you're a teenager, and then you come back to it when you've grown up a little, and it still resonates, and those are the books that you hold the most dear, no, to you, because they just keep growing up with you. And I think I chose these three albums because I think there is this grittiness and chaos that you can feel, like in the structure, in the images they evoke, there is this uneasiness that they make me feel, and there is always this dissonance gravitating around melodies or bright sounds, no, that sometimes like chime or appear out of nowhere within the sound. And I chose these three albums because I really like albums that are cinematic to me. That when I listen to them, I immediately, start daydreaming. It's almost like when you read a book, or it happens so easily, so naturally, that you don't have to force your brain, into a state where you can listen to these albums. Yeah. And I think that's really something that I love about it. This honesty.
I think all those qualities really draw me in, and I also chose them because I think, at least in my experience, I think they do have they follow some like a narrative for me. Like when I listen to them, sometimes together, when I think of them, I like to think of them like they have some kind of narrative that they work. That works for the three of them, so I also chose them because of that.
Wicked. Nice. Well, I'll let you pick whichever one you want to go for first, if you give me the name of it, and then a little bit about why it's important to you as well.
Okay, so I think the first one I would like to talk about is this album called Come Home by Golden Living Room. I actually stumbled upon it in a very strange way, like through Reddit, because I often surf Reddit just sometimes for some inspiration. I just like to read some posts, and I do sometimes get like some ideas for music and stuff. But I stumbled upon this narrative, this weird narrative that was hidden in the comments that started in 2016, but I found it a bit later. I guess towards the end of 2016, beginning of 2017, like a lot of other people that just stumbled onto this narrative hidden in the comments. Like you just get so like sucked into the narrative that you were just, every link that will appear, you just follow it, and that's how I stumbled upon this amazing record. Ever since I heard it. Also with the context of that original narrative that was linked to it, and as I've matured, matured ideas and everything, this album just keeps propping up in my imaginary, and I really love this kind of sounds that they can migrate to other narratives, to other visuals, and I think that's why I really chose it. Because it's also an inspiration in the way it makes me feel. It makes me, very quickly switch to an imaginary state of mind. Like very quickly I can, abstract myself and just enter into this strange place evoked by these sounds, which are, very, very strange at the same time, very familiar. It has this uncanny familiarity, like you're watching some commercial from the 90s or so I don't know, I think it does have so many incredible details, and the more I listen to it, the more I hear these little nuances and these little details in the sounds, in how the loops layer together, or I think that's why it's one of the three albums that I chose.
I mean, you say that it places you in your imagination. Can you tell me about what kind of scene this record is bringing you into? Like, what is it in your mind's eye that you're seeing while listening to Come Home?
I think there is this strange, familiar and cruel optimism within it. There is this kind of like the stillness of the mundane that I think everybody has experienced in one way or another. But there is this sense, like a home atmosphere, but it's just stale, Yes. And if you will see the cover of the album, I mean, that living room just. I think that's also a very powerful collective memory.
Yeah.
That is, sometimes it's even appropriated, but it's just very powerful image. So it really brings me back to this kind of consumerist home. You feel it with objects. You have pictures of relatives. You have medals, trophies, and together with that you have toys, and there is this messy everyday that you just exist through that messiness. And at the same time, there is this, these memories just gravitating in that stillness of the everyday, of the domestic. And I mean, for me, it has really specific images about that, about this staleness of the everyday. And I really love that. I do a lot of artworks as well. I've done a lot of artworks, and my thesis dealing a bit with these feelings of, cruel optimism. There is this book by Lauren Berlant also called Cruel Optimism. And, they just discuss these strange feelings of failed utopias, within our everydays. And I think this album really brings that out for me.
Yeah. Hearing you talk about it and reading your thoughts on it as well while listening really connected a lot of things for me in terms of how this record made me feel as well. I think what you say about the uncanny is so interesting, because I guess even the very notion of it referring to home feels jarring, because you can't have like an archetypal home, right? I mean, it's either a house or it's something that you can connect with personally, specifically to your experiences, and then it becomes a home. Like this idea that there's a home that could exist within shared consciousness is kind of eerie in itself, and this is sort of where this record seems to exist when I've been listening to it over the past couple of days. I mean, certainly it seems to be an album that's affiliated with like the vaporwave. I've heard it referred to as like dream punk and stuff. I mean, is that somewhere that you've kind of probed into as well, Laura?
I like some works of vaporware. I like some of its aesthetic sometimes. But what I really like is, I'm glad you mentioned it, because I think it wraps up with that idea of that uncanny of the home, of those sort of, an uncanny failed utopia. And I think at the beginning of, all the first works of vaporware, they have this kind of aura of disappointment, with consumerism, and it was like a disappointment, but at the same time a nostalgia to go back to that.
Yeah.
Like maybe to revisit what went wrong in the 90s, because it made us feel great. We had the internet, we had suddenly so many products we can buy, and make our lives nicer, supposedly. But then here we are in 2020. So I think there is this, I really like those concepts of vaporware, and I think, Golden Living Room was one of the first ones, and in my opinion, like one of deepest pieces, like artworks or sonic compositions, to think of those themes, of those disappointments that are I think those feelings are very strange to pinpoint from my experience talking with other people, and so because it's so widespread in the internet as well. You can find that these are feelings that I think most of us share or have shared at some point. These feelings of disappointment, of what to do next, of having so many things we bought, but nothing really substantially changes in our lives, in our prospects, and I think it's just, such a strange feeling to pinpoint in words. But for me, sonically, this album manages to do it. Like I listen to this and I feel it like that,
Yeah. It's interesting because I often feel like that there's an escapist quality to it, although it's so much more fraught than that implies when you put it like that, right? It's not just, hitting the ejector button out of your present. It's so much more emotionally complicated. You're taking the present with you when you go. So you mentioned that you have some favourite tracks on this record. Which ones particularly protrude for you?
My favorite, well, one of my favorites is Come Home and Sleeping in the Night and then Flying in Your Sleep, which, well, that's another thing that I love about this album, that, you know, there are these sounds that just are repeated in the tracks. And it's like, it's not like the tracks were split in the middle, but you do feel that there is this sort of continuation in the sound. So Sleeping in the Night and Flying in Your Sleep, you know, it just feels like this long story that you're being told. And my other favorite one is Supreme Onlooker.
Nice. I mean, how much do you know about the creation of this record? Because I know that with a lot of music that's kind of connected stylistically to vaporwave, that it's exclusively sample based. But is this played on live instruments, or I don't suppose you know?
Yeah, I've read that actually what made it really like stand out, it was that you know, because a lot of vaporwave is loops, you know, samples from videos or like YouTube and stuff like that. And what made this album also really stand out, it was that they were using instruments most of the time, but they sound like loops, you know, like there is this familiarity that you might hear some of those sounds in a 90s app, but they're actually made with instruments. So I think that's what also made it this, you know, I think that's also what makes it have this impact emotionally as well, because it's almost like that picture, I don't know if you've seen it, where this AI generated this image where you sort of think you're seeing something familiar,
right?
But you just can't realize what it is. So, and they're saying it's like that experience of having a stroke, that you just can't really tell what you're looking at, but it looks familiar.
Right.
I think in some of these sounds there is that experience to it, like they sound familiar, but you really don't know what are they, where are they coming from.
Laura, let's go to your second important record now. Again, I'll let you pick which one you want to talk about, if you give me the name of it and then a bit about why it's important to you as well.
Okay, so the second album I picked was, it's called Mystery Oaths by Core of the Coleman. And this one was released in 2020, so I think it's like, I think it also resonates quite a lot with me just because of the year. Now I see just 2020 and it's a bit a strange number. So yeah, I mean, I started listening to this, right in the pandemic lockdown here in Mexico, and I've been listening to it quite repeatedly, just while reading or just trying to have a breathe for the day. I really fell in love with it because I just felt like every time I was listening to it that, they are like little snapshots. Like each track is like a snapshot of like visions of memories. But at the same time, I really like how some of these sounds, like they're just walls of guitars and reverb, and they have this, at least for me, they have this quality of like grandiosity, like they feel like they are growing in the space and filling up all the space, but at the same time they feel like memories, and I was just thinking, like there is, like, for me, they're like just memories that they just keep growing and growing as you remember them and change them and idealize them so much that they just become these mythical images, they came from little bits of memories until they evolve, into these massive visions. And I really like that about the album, that it has this, there is this, like, the same with Golden Living Room. I think there is this melancholy and, this kind of disappointment in the images, but at the same time there is this like clash of mysticism and the mythical of the sounds, because how large they grow as some of the tracks evolve. I also like the artist behind it, which is his name is Jorge Beringer, because he was also my teacher, and he is actually the person who encouraged me like to start doing music, because before I met him I was really, I was just going towards cinema and photography, and I had never stopped to think that sonically you also can have very interesting narratives and visual narratives as well, even if it's only a sonic input, and he's also, an inspiration to me, not only this album but all other work he's doing, and that's why I also chose this album. And I also started reading this amazing book. I started reading it while listening to Core of the Coleman's album, which is called A Space on the Side of the Road by Kathleen Stewart. And I really recommend this book. It's cultural poetics. It's really beautifully written, and it just creates these amazing images of what we were talking about earlier, about the mundane, the stale, the optimism within all of those everyday feelings that we just can't really pinpoint. So I think listening Mystery Odes together with this book, it just made me like visualize everything exponentially. It was really inspiring for me as well, not only sonically, but with the ideas the images that I could see as I was reading and listening at the same time.
I'm intrigued to dig into this idea of this music as memories. What is it about? I don't know if this is possible to articulate even more than you already have so eloquently, but what is it about this music which generates the impression of being connected to memory? Like, is there? I don't know, what characteristics is it that's Jorge's pulling on in order to generate that sensation? Because I know precisely what you mean from listening to it, but I'm intrigued as to whether it's something that can be pinpointed.
I don't know. It's because it's such a personal experience. I don't know if I can. Maybe when I listen to it, somebody else will be like, "What?" But I think for me, it's that similarity with what we were discussing with Golden Living Room. That there are these sounds that you recognize, and even I think without realizing, some of these guitars or melodies, or even the voice, the tone of the voice, or the pace of the tracks, I think sometimes subconsciously we already associate them with certain images, with certain memories, or even appropriated memories, like things we've seen on movies or things we've read about. And I think subconsciously, I think we already have those associations. And I think that's the case with Jorge's album, with Mystery Odes. I think there is this, because of these sounds that also, they are familiar, but at the same time not. They have this hazy, distant feeling of them that you cannot really pinpoint. Are there two guitars? Is it just one? is it one massive reverb on top of a reverb, and they are just canceling each other or adding to each other. So I think there is all this like ethereal spatiality. Like when I listen to it, I think like I get this like space, like sonic space that is just growing and growing. For me, like those are the beginnings of like the qualities of like listening to places of memory, like entering into somebody else's little snapshots.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I think they feel so honest, and that's why I think they can really grab you as the listener and create your own mythologies as you're listening to them. But at the same time, there's also something really personal about them. That you also feel a bit like a voyeur, like you're just intruding into somebody else's, somebody else's thoughts. And I think that's really what I like. And I think, I don't know if I could explain it in any other way, because it's very subjective, I think, all that experience with memory and what triggers memories, or what can trigger images, evocative feelings, or even moments of synesthesia, like that you're listening to something and that you feel you've seen, you felt already that sort of sensation while listening to music. So it's really very subjective. But I think the melodies, the distorted guitars, the voice, I really like the tone and the bass of the singing. And it really resonated with me with a quote from this book, Space on the Side of the Road, which is like, there is a dream that somewhere out there in the space of marginalia and eccentricity, there are places still caught in the ongoing density of sociality and desire, places to which we might return, in mind if not in body, in search of redemption and renewal. And those two words, redemption and renewal, and just like going to those places, I think, at least for me, in the way these sounds are layered, there is this combination of haziness, grittiness, but at the same time there is like brightness in all of them. I think it just summed out the album for me so well.
Wicked. Amazing answer. The phrase ethereal spatiality that you included in your notes and touched on there I think is so interesting. And in these early experiences of listening to the album myself, I think that's something that's really protruded for me already, how with seemingly so few elements there's this obfuscation of what is where. I mean, it certainly feels like a record that being, a lot of the time just voice and guitar, usually that's something that feels very rooted in location, and it just doesn't have that within Jorge's music. It's really quite disarming, especially over headphones when you expect to be able to point at the sound and say, that's where it is. You can't do that with this record. Yeah,
I think there is this elusiveness in all the sounds, and it just drags you in, because you are like you say, just trying to pinpoint it, and you just can't, and it's just it's like somebody's dragging you in deeper.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You mentioned Jorge being your teacher and mentor. Was there anything specific you can convey as to what it was that he taught you? Any like prominent takeaways that you still think about now?
Well, I started, we had this class, he was teaching a class about, experimental sound, and we had this little assignment of going around with our recorder around the city and just record, field recordings. And it was really my first experience, just like taking some samples and then trying to do something with these noises, that for me at the time I really didn't have much like appreciation for how these sounds can really bring you back to a moment or an image. For me, I was just recording, dogs barking in a park or or stuff like, or like ambient noise when you go to a supermarket or a shopping mall or in a train station. And I was just recording all of this. And I remember when we were back in class and just working with looping, that suddenly just all clicked for me. And till this moment, I still love using loops. And what really clicked to me is that I could just construct these loops, which some of them had different tempos and, totally different tonalities. And you could just let them evolve on their own, even if they were just 1 second loop. And then they would start creating on their own these patterns that started to be quite interesting. And he really encouraged me, to keep pursuing those explorations with loops, with sounds. That how a sound that can be very, like, you think is very inconsequential because it's 1 minute long. Suddenly, when you make it a second, suddenly it just has something that works.
Yeah.
And so I think that encouragement really was eye-opener for me, because I've always been trying to do that with cinema, and just discovering how sound could also be edited in such a way, like images. It was really, really something for me.
Brilliant. And if we're going to play a track from Mystery Odes here, which one would you like us to play a little clip?
It's a hard, tough choice. Between Annie on the Coast or First Ray, so I'll let you choose.
Nicely done. Well, let's go to your third important record now, Laura. Again, if you could give me the name of it and a bit about why it's important to you as well.
Okay, I don't know if I'll pronounce it well.
I don't blame you.
But I'll try. If not, you can correct me. So the third album is Nereal, Genesis Terrain, by Bad Consolidated.
Nice.
And I don't know if I said the title all right, but and I really the reason why I chose this album, together with the other two we've been talking about, is that I really felt that I was listening to like 3 different temporalities in these 3 albums, and that this one really felt. I think it felt very contemporary, like, and a very personal struggle that I can relate as a millennial as well. So I thought in the previous 2 albums, I think I could think of like a stillness that we traverse as we hear the sounds, as the sounds break and loop into each other. Like the golden living room is that uncanny of the familiarity of the home, like a distorted memory of it, and Mystery Odes is, it's like this, the ordinary getting so distorted that it just becomes mythical, but there's still this stillness that we kind of go through. This introversion, I really feel this kind of introversion. But this album by Bad Consolidated, it feels like the opposite, like the temporalities are totally reversed. Like it's you who are still, and all these things and sounds and information are just like, piercing you and traveling all over you, and you just, it's like this pandemonium of things just that you cannot grasp, that are just going all around you. Like the cities, like being in a city or being in a shopping mall and just having all these like sensory inputs, and you just don't know what to do with all of these. So it just feels like that. It feels like this, the total opposite of, in terms of temporality, of experienced tempos, within our lives, and that's really something that grabbed me. And as I was mentioning, I was kind of thinking like of a narrative, and for me it was that, those three temporalities coming together, like like the introverted boredom, uncanniness or nostalgia, and then you have the aspirational domesticity, and then on top of that, with this album, is like the overwhelming, reality that is just, as we are right now, is just, you're just thrown into the chaos. Right. There is no home anymore. It's just information all around you.
yeah, which I guess segues nicely into the concept of this record. You mentioned that Noelle has written and recorded this album from the perspective of a millennial, and she explains that it's connected to this idea of generating a millennial mythos. What are your thoughts on that? Is that an aspect of the work you connect with as well?
Yeah, I found that really interesting and a really amazing concept when I read it. Because I heard the music first, and I was already having these sort of ideas just because of the samples, the loops, and the whole kind of feeling you get from listening it. But then I just read, the little description, and I was just really. It was just added a different level to what this album meant for me when I was listening to it. And I just really love how she explains, that we are caught between the past and the future, and I've always liked this concept that, the eternal present, that we're just living in that, and it's just became, this hyper object that we just can't escape. We feel we are inside it, but it's so big we just can't really grasp it, so we just go on our lives, ignoring that little itch that, So I can really relate a lot. I think not only millennials can relate. I think this is something that can go beyond that generation, I think. And what I really like is that mythology, and I think it sits so well with the other two albums, because this is kind of like a mythology of the idealized self, I think, the idealized millennial lifestyle. And I just really like how she says, when she's talking about her track named Medulla, where she's like, I pictured a Boltzmann brain appearing at the Big Bang with the personality of a millennial. The great filter climbing the walls of the biblical bottomless pit.
It's great. Yeah.
Yeah, I really like the cynicism combined with like the stoicism of just existing in modern times. I really love, that realization.
Yeah. There's a nice line where it's like, this album is copying, pasting my peers into Dante's Inferno or the Bible and seeing what happens. It's you mentioned this is, a sensation that isn't just specific to millennials. And when you talk about that idea of the eternal present, that makes total sense. Is there something specific about being a millennial which potentially generates this sensation even more perhaps? Just the fact, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of literature out there. I haven't read much of it.
Yeah.
But, you know, about how I guess we are just more culture recycling, and maybe there isn't a space in which, you know, millennial generation exists in its own right. And it is right for being just vanquished to history. So do you think there's something specific about being a millennial that makes this feeling even more potent?
I think it's because we are more aware that you know, when we were born, there were all these utopias that were created in our parents' generations. When we were born, they had also started to fall apart, you know, like, and I think we are aware of all those things. I think we are in a sort of limbo as millennials because we had a little taste of what it was to have, you know, illusions for the present, illusions for the future, you know, because our parents were giving us that confidence of you can be whoever you want to be. You know, we grew up in a security that no other generation had when we were children and teenagers. But then suddenly we are now in that limbo where all of that security is basically, you know, it was an illusion all this time. And I think maybe that makes it. I think that because we are realizing this, I think there is this. I don't know how to say, like disillusion with what our parents and, you know, what we saw when we were growing up in the media, you know, in consumerism, you know, in terms of our identities, in terms of who you could become, no, when you will grow up. I think that's why it makes it like, you know, that we can feel more that that sensation of being stuck in a sort of limbo or in the constant infinite present, you know, that we are just jumping from present to present, and it feels a bit like a daydream, no, to think of future or the past, and I think it's really interesting all these I think all these mythologies that are being created about the past, about the 90s and the 80s. And I think it's not only the millennials, I think the earlier generations as well, and the Gen Zs, you know, I think we are experiencing this kind of nostalgia. It goes back really to memory, you know, like we're seeking for a perfect time. But I think there was never a perfect time. We just idealize it and distort it so much. You know, it just becomes this mythic, utopic past that we had and we lost. And you know, it's just such a strange, it's such a strange age to be alive.
Yeah. And this record definitely feels like exemplifies that as well.
Yeah. Yes.
Big time.
Yeah. I mean, I think what is kind of funny, well, not funny, but interesting, I think, is, you know, a lot of millennials went through the emo phase, right? When we were teenagers. But I think now, as we've grown older, we've just gone into the hedonistic phase of, you know, well, let's just enjoy life and try to be kind to each other, and that's it, because what else? And I just find it a bit funny that jump, you know, because there is this sort of, you know, like trolling, like this sense of trolling as well in bad consolidated and the description, you know, like trolling ourselves.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I just one question I wanted to ask about this. I can totally see, for example, over this period of lockdown, where something like Come Home would exist in your home listening. Like, again, it's something that you can really bed into within the stillness of being trapped at home. Same with mystery odes, that I can totally understand. This record by Bath Consolidated sounds so frenetic, and I think thinking about where I've been over this lockdown, and I guess, you know, as we were talking about, quite intense dreams has been a facet of this lockdown experience. This almost like this deprivation of stimulation. I feel like that this record would send me into some kind of crazed overdrive. I mean, where does it fit into your home listening at the moment? Is it a record that you can listen to comfortably while we're in the midst of this crisis?
Yeah, I actually I really like it because I do think it draws, especially like you mentioned, in contrast with the other two albums, I think it did draw parallels with like a lot of, I think, what a lot of people are experiencing. You know, that you are still in your house, you know, the days just become this blob of, you know, day, night. But at the same time, because we have the internet, which is, you know, if this pandemic had happened in any other time, I don't know how we could have done it because we wouldn't have the internet. But I think the internet, you know, you are in this stillness, this stale home version of your life, you know. But at the same time, you go online, and there were all these other things happening.
Yes.
You know, it just felt so chaotic, so like I still have it. But for example, there was a moment at the peak of the pandemic here where nobody could go out. And I was like, I had signed up for like 10 events that were happening online at the same time, you know. So it was this, you know, this FOMO, you know, like fear of missing out. And I think I really love that parallel with this album as well, you know, that. And I think, I don't know if it's only me and like some complex you know, like inferiority complex, or how do you call it, like the, you know, like you're faking it till you make it, or, you know, that you have that feeling that everybody else is doing stuff except yourself. Yes. That everybody else has stuff going on, even in a pandemic. How is that possible? You know, and you feel this stress coming out of nowhere. It's just like this self-imposed stress of I have to do something, I have to study, I have to be productive, and it's something that a lot of people were mentioning. I read many articles, you know, of people just using that about Mozart, for example. He wrote. He was like, he became a genius during the pandemic, and you should do that too. So I think it just fits perfectly, this album, you know, at the same, like on a physical level, you are standing still. But on the interwebs, there is just all this messiness and all this chaos and all these like aspirations that just can't reach. You feel like you're just standing still, you know, taking pictures of your dog. And I don't know, I think that's why I really liked that contrast of these three albums together.
That feels like a wonderful place to bring everything together. I mean, one question I also like to ask is, if you really want to listen to a record, one of these records or any other, and appreciate it as much as you possibly can, give it as much dedicated time and attention as you can, do you have a particular setup or routine or place that allows you to have that kind of listening experience?
Yeah, for me, it's well, before the pandemic, it was just when I was, on the bus or in the train and going somewhere, or even just walking. And even though it's dangerous if you're walking with earphones, but for me that was it was really the best. Just be walking, because you abstract yourself of an action, and at the same time you are just listening very attentively. So that works really well for me. But at the same time, I really enjoy just reading with these kind of tracks. I find it, for me, like when I'm making my own tracks, like if I can listen to my tracks while I'm reading and not be thinking like, oh, that loop sounds strange, or oh, I need to fix that. If I can just sit down and read and really get into the story while I'm listening, for me that's a done track. Oh, it's done.
Brilliant.
And when I listen to albums and I do get that abstraction right away, that's, I think, like a very nice way to listen to these kind of albums.
Fantastic. Well, Laura, it's been wonderful. Thank you so much for digging into these records, into your own recent record as well. I've had a great time speaking with you.
Thank you so much. I had a great time too.
And if people want to check out your music, like I say, they should definitely check out Tuberose, but you have other works as well. Where's the best place for them to head online?
It can be my webpage,
cool,
which is lauralunacastillo.net, or in Bandcamp, just with my name and
cool.
on the search bar.
Fantastic. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you once again to everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.